The next message is unsigned. I am used the heart to visit him. I am only doing cleaning job. I am so happy to come and see him last day. He knows so many Singaporeans love him. A son of Singapore. This is a phrase used to describe Ben in dozens of condolence messages. A son of Singapore. Next, a message on behalf of Datuk Ambiga Srinivasan. The members of the Malaysian Bar Council and the Malaysian Bar as a whole salute a great lawyer, a great fighter, and above all, a great man. He is an inspiration for all lawyers on both sides of the causeway. Finally, from K.C. Lai. Thank you for teaching us the meaning of courage.
JBJ dies. Shockwaves, Dow plunges. So read Wednesday's headlines in the Straits Times. For once, they were spot on. Dad was born on 5th of January 1926 in Cengkana, Jaffna, where his parents were on home leave from Muar, Malaya. His personal name given to him was Benjamin, and today, for the first time, for this eulogy, I'll call him Ben. His mother doted on him. His father was a sterner, more remote figure, but ingrained in the young boy an unyielding honesty. Even a single cent mistakenly given in change had to be returned to the shopkeeper, whether the error was discovered there and then or sometime later. Ben began school at the convent, the only boy among the girls. I've sometimes wondered if this had anything to do with his lifelong charm, a debonair air that he carried to the end. You've seen the photographs. Later he studied at Muar English School, and last year when I drove him to visit his old home in Muar, we stopped by at the school where the principal was delighted to see the return of such an old boy. Ben recounted how once he had to stand on his desk 4 days in a row. He could not remember precisely why, but I imagine it was not for some petty indiscipline, but for a stubborn adherence to a point of view that his teacher did not share. In 1941, the family moved to Johor shortly before the Japanese invasion. As the Japanese army swarmed down the peninsula, the family left town. One day, with the Japanese in control, 2 British soldiers turned up at their doorstep. Water and a little food was all they could offer them, much to Ben's regret. During the occupation, he worked as a translator for the transport department. One day, following a theft, he was called in for questioning by the Kumputai, who were investigating. While he was not a suspect, the experience felt very different from the ceremony, procedure, and safeguards of the pre-war colonial administration. Someone had told his mother he was being interviewed, and that evening he found her wailing and forlorn, looking out for his return some distance from their home. What brought him to the study of law at University College London after the war was his religious conviction, and in particular the implication that he drew from that conviction. The highest duty in life, he believed, is to love God, practical terms to serve Him. That meant to serve one's fellow man, help the poor, sick and aged, give a voice to those who are unable to speak for themselves. Giving a voice to the silent brought him into law and later led him into politics. In London, Ben's life changed in 2 important ways. As a student at the International Hostel, Connaught Hall, he met and became friends with people from all over the empire, young men and women whose hearts and minds were on independence and the building of new nations. He and his best friend, Philip Woodfield, my godfather, attended political meetings and joined in campaigns together. They also shared a love of literature that endured in men, even when reading had become something of a physical strain. The second thing occurred only in his second year, for then a certain girl from Bournemouth entered UCL. But Margaret had to continue in England to complete her solicitor's articles. Her own mother was also in ill health. She was reluctant to leave her mother and venture to a distant, distant city. She said no. Ben came home disconsolate. He joined the legal service. In 1955, he returned to England with one single aim in mind. One day, walking along the Bournemouth cliffs, he and Margaret encountered a graffito. Trust in God and go. This was the sign she needed, and she left for Singapore in 1956 with a job waiting for her at the same firm in which I am now a partner. A few months later, on 23rd of February 1957, they were married. Kenneth was born 2 years later, and after the premature birth of the boy who died within days, I joined my brother in 1964. Ben became Registrar of the Supreme Court and then First District Judge. His thoughts, however, were turning toward a more active role in society. In 1962, in a speech at a YMCA luncheon, he said, "It is not enough to go to church on Sundays to sing about onward Christian soldiers, about fighting the evils of the world, if nothing is done by Christians when they emerge from church." He left legal service and entered private practice, where he soon made his name as a tenacious and determined criminal defense lawyer. For him, there was no such thing as a hopeless case if he believed his client's protestations of innocence. I'll give an example of this later, but his next step was to enter politics, and thus began his difficult struggle. Everyone in Singapore knows where they were when they heard that he took Anson. But not many recall the hard battles before, when he lost often narrowly, and after facing down savage attacks on his patriotism. These years were made harder still by Margaret's long illness and death from cancer in 1980. Yet his faith in God never wavered, nor did his belief in himself and his mission. Shortly before her death, Margaret told me that her one regret was that she had not said yes sooner. I was with him at the counting centre at Anson, a fresh recruit into the army. I was at the back of the crowd. He called out, "Where is my son?" And I found myself lifted bodily over the heads of his supporters to be with him for his victory speech. He expressed his humility at being the people's choice and then spoke of it as his saddest moment, in that Margaret was not with him. Her memory stayed with him, keeping him going through his darkest moments. That very night, immediately, he sent a telegram to Kenneth, wailing. Ben was a server at this great cathedral, and the next Sunday, though it was not his turn, he asked to carry the cross. He was not saying that God had given him victory. Rather, he was saying that all he did in his life was meant by him to be in service of the Lord. And so he entered Parliament. For that, of course, you can read Hansard. But for him it was law and advocacy in a new guise, speaking for those who might not otherwise be heard, arguing always for fairness, due process, and equity. Parliament and the court meant so much to him, and the worst times of his life were when he was deprived of these through disqualification. Notwithstanding this, he was the epitome of grace, even though others failed to accept the true implications of the Privy Council's restoration of him as an advocate and solicitor. And so he was not pardoned nor reinstated to his seat in Parliament. He bore it all stoically, fully confident that right was on his side. But the Privy Council's decision at least restored into practice, and I come now to my example. 3 persons had confessed to a murder at a coffee shop. Their confessions were ruled to be voluntary, admissible. They could be convicted and sentenced to death on the basis of these confessions. But he kept going, and sure enough, he turned up the lead of another culprit and pressed for fingerprint evidence held by the prosecution to be checked for a match against this person. The prosecution did so and drew the case. It was a huge vindication of the role of defense counsel. His bankruptcy, following devastating libel suits, deprived him once again of parliamentary and legal life. Thankfully, we were able to help to bring him out of it, and he had a terrific final year back in the saddle, forming a new party and appearing in court